Get right to the floor show. Joining me now is Geltrude and Company founder Dan Geltrude and Circle Squared Alternative Investment CEO Jeff Sica. Gentlemen, it's great to have you both here. I want to get to the banks, but Dan, I want to circle back to AI here for a second as we're waiting to hear from these senators on Capitol Hill. And the big question marks these senators have is national security, user privacy, and also military implications. And this briefing is the White House, this is Pentagon officials, as well as Defense Department officials. So when it comes to AI, we do know that there is one agency that's really excited about AI. That's the IRS, Dan.
Yes, the IRS getting into the AI game, and let me tell you how they're going to do it. They are going to focus in on the algorithms that AI really specializes in. Remember, the IRS has an enormous amount of data on everyone and everything. When they start to implement AI and they can figure out where the cheaters are, let's say, because even though we don't like the IRS, we don't like people who don't pay their taxes because that costs everyone. So the IRS now is saying, hey, are we really going to be able to find 87,000 new employees? Of course not. But AI could make up a huge piece of that. And there are some numbers out there where the IRS could recover $600 billion a year using AI and the algorithms it can produce.
Jeff, you're not so much in the camp of AI right now. You believe that we need to maybe put on the brakes a little bit. Why?
Yeah, and I have to say, Dan scared me with all this talk about what the IRS is going to use against us to collect taxes. But I would say with AI, I was early on, I loved it, and I've taken this ride. But now we're dealing with what I would consider a very similar situation as we had in 1999, which is that you have a lot of these companies. It is a defining technology. It is going to define the next era in technology. But you look at some of these companies like NVIDIA. NVIDIA is trading at a PE that's equivalent to about 200 years of current earnings. So there is an optimism for this sector that we haven't seen in a very long time. And anytime you see this amount of optimism with so many questions as to what direction it's going to go in, most people, when you ask them, what do you like about AI? They give you a very generic overview of, I like ChatGPT, I like the prospect for semiconductors, but in reality, nobody knows what direction it's going to go in.
Well, and I think that's one of the reasons that I'm curious to hear what Chuck Schumer and team had to say after this briefing today, because the concern obviously is that the government officials, whether it's senators or I know Kevin McCarthy's talked about trying to rein in AI, that they're going to regulate something that they don't understand, and that's certainly, I think, a little disconcerting. We'll see what we hear from Capitol Hill in Washington. Let's move on to CPI, Dan. Obviously, that's the big story for the week, and this will give us a good sense of whether or not the consumer is healthy or not, depending on the prices that they're going to be paying for everything from eggs to fuel. The expectations here for CPI is we are going to see, thanks guys, is going to be a month-to-month 0.3% jump, and then that headline CPI, Dan, I think is the big story, 3.1%, getting closer to that 2% that the Fed is targeting. Dan?
Well, I think no matter where the CPI number comes in, and I understand that we're projecting it to come down, I still believe the Fed will march forward and continue to raise rates. Now, whether they should have done that in the last month in terms of pausing, that remains to be seen. But remember, inflation is still significant. And the reason that people, I believe, are still buying and keeping the economy rolling is because they're taking on more debt, specifically credit card debt. It just seems like a lot of people out there have the attitude that they can keep spending and they're not going to actually have to pay for it. Well, you know what? The piper is going to need to be paid. And I don't think people have that attitude right now. So I expect CPI to come down, but consumers to continue to buy.
Interesting. Jeff, do you agree with that? I mean, he's got a point about, in particular, the tight labor market. I mean, that's where we've seen the consumer kind of hold up. They're digging into their savings a little bit, to be clear here, but they have not stopped spending.
Well, I think what Dan said was true, is that you have the highest credit card debt we've seen in history with the highest interest rates. And you have corporate debt at 14 trillion. You have car repossessions increasing. There's a lot of negatives out there. And although the Fed has this target, to this 2% target, the big question is, when are they going to break the entire system? Because it's not that they're raising interest rates, and it's not that they're being vigilant against inflation. It's the velocity of which they've raised interest rates, and it's the shock to the system. So you'll have CPI come out tomorrow. The Fed, yes, they came out and they said they would most likely raise interest rates 2 more times, but there's a lot of negative that could come out of that. So although I think that it's important that they raise interest rates, we have a Federal Reserve who has proven that they're dazed and confused. They don't really know what they're doing. And if they don't deal with the supply side issues, this is going to create a scenario where we could see a recession come September and October.
You still think we could have? No, you're not saying soft landing.
I don't see
a recession is not a. That's not a soft landing.
I don't see a soft landing, and you could see it by how the bond yields have inverted. Usually when a bond yield inverts, it takes about 13 months, which would bring us to October. So yeah, I think we're going to see a soft landing, and all this real estate debt that needs to refinance, that's where you're going to see
the commercial real estate debt. Yeah, we've talked about a lot about that on the network. Jeff Sica, Dan Geltrude, gentlemen, thank you so much for being with me. Appreciate it.